Today's daf began by telling us that the Korban Pesach may not be eaten if it was cooked. Not only cooked, but even if it was first tzolei, first he roasted it and then bishlei. Or bishlei v'achach tzolei, that is also included in the Isser. Now the kasha that the Achronim ask is as follows. If we say that first roasted and then cooked is problematic, apparently you're indicating that it's the final stage of the process, the final phase that determines matters. So even though it was already pre-roasted, but since he completed the process by cooking it, it is now considered a cooked item, and therefore is asur. If that's the case, let's always follow the last phase, the last stage of the process. So how can we say that if it was first cooked and then roasted, it's problematic? What was the last phase in the process? Tzliya. If we follow the last stage, it's considered a roasted item. So how can we have it both ways? First roasted and then cooked is considered cooked. First cooked and then roasted, that's also considered cooked. Do we follow the last phase or not? So the Pri Megadim says, the point here is very simple. It's not that the last phase undoes the previous stage. It adds to it. It doesn't overtake it, it doesn't replace it. That explains the Gemara. The Chiddush is, even when it was pre-roasted, but then, in addition to being roasted, it was also cooked. That cooking process adds benefit, adds flavor to this previously roasted item. Sure, it's roasted, but it's also cooked. And the Chiddush of the Gemara is that even this partial cooking, this additional cooking element, additional cooked element, is sufficient to make the Isser, and we consider it as somewhat mevushal, therefore it's us. Okay, that explains that if it was first cooked and then roasted, so sure, the roasting process which comes at the end adds that roasted element to it, but it doesn't take away the fact that it was initially mevushal. So once again, you're left with something which has both elements. It's roasted but also cooked, and therefore it's considered mevushal. So that explains the Gemara. So it's always asur. Whether it came first or second, the bishul contained therein is considered enough bishul to make it asur. Based on this, we can answer a kasha on Rashi. The Gemara says that, according to the Rabbanan, how do we know other mashkim are considered mevushal? Because of the kal v'chomer. Since water, despite the fact that it's tasteless, doesn't interfere with the original flavor of the basar, that is also considered problematic. Certainly shar mashkim, which are mefig and taman, which affect the flavor and taste of the meat, would be asur if it was cooked within those mashkim. Rabbi says, very simple, bashal mevushal includes all types of bishul. The nafkamina, it's li keder. It was cooked in its own juice. According to Rabbi, that's also called cooked. According to Rabbanan, we don't have the interference from the other mashkim because it's its own juice, its own natural flavor. Therefore, it's not considered asur. That's how Rashi learns. According to Rabbanan, it's mutter. Taiz has a kash on Rashi. Taiz never maskal ikhi benayu says, what do you mean? How can I say it's mutter? True, it's not mevushal perhaps, but nor is it tzliesh. It was roasted / cooked in its own juice in a pot. It wasn't directly roasted through a fire. And it brings the Gemara later that this type of roasting is not considered. So true, it's not properly mevushal, but it's not yet tzliesh. It doesn't have that either. So how can Rashi say that it's mutter b'achil? That's Tosfos Kash on Rashi. And as a result, Tosfos says, you're right, it's really asur. It means to say that there's no malchus, it's not mevushal. But it's still asur because the Torah tells you clearly, you meant to eat tzliesh. This is not tzliesh. So you're negating the mitzvah saseh. That's Tosfos pshat. This agrees with Rashi. So how do we answer Rashi's kasha? So the Rosh Yeshiva wants to say that Rashi meant that the tzli keder will be mutter according to Rabbanan. Right? The kasha was, how can it be mutter? It's not tzliesh. The answer is, we're speaking about a unique case where it was first roasted and then was cooked in a tzli keder fashion. In this case specifically, according to Rabbanan, we mutter. Why? Because it was roasted. It's tzliesh. It's totally mutter. Mitzvah say it's tzliesh. Now, what about the fact that it's also cooked in addition to tzliesh? And we know the Gemara tells us tzoli and then mevushal is considered mevushal. Why would this be different? So he says that the Rabbanan hold that mevushal is only concerned because it adds flavor, it changes, it distorts the original flavor. But this slikeder doesn't do that. So the fact that it's already roasted gives it a din of a tzali, and the bish that comes afterwards won't negate it, won't interfere with the tzli. So this is only because the pshat, as we mentioned, why when you have a tzali and then mevushal, do we say it's mevushal and it's no good? Because that second process, second stage adds, benefits the piece of meat. Until now it was only tzali, now you added some more flavor, some new element of bishul. That's why we say, well, it's somewhat mevushal and it's usher. However, in this case, where it isn't your typical bishul, which is changing the flavor, it's slikeder, which maintains the original flavor, the original taste. In this case, says the Rosh Yosef, there will be no concern. That's the Pshat and Rashi. We still consider it as a roasted item, because it was tzali and then it went through slikeder, which is this light form of cooking which doesn't generate any change in the nature. It doesn't affect the flavor. So if the pshat would be that when you have a tzali and then mevushal, the reason why it's also because the subsequent bishul replaces the tzli, it's no longer regarded as a roasted item. It achieves a new status, a new title called mevushal, because bishul was the last thing on the list. If that would be the pshat, then the kasha and Rashi would be difficult, because even though it was already tzali, but now it's mevushal, and the bishul overtakes the tzli. It's no longer considered roasted, it's considered cooked. But if the pshat is that it's not that it overtakes it, it adds. Sure, it's tzali, but it's also mevushal. And that is the chiddush of the Gemara, that even this minor form of bishul, this minor element, this added aspect of bishul is enough to make it a mevushal, because he's adding something to the tzli, therefore it has to be reckoned with. That's the pshat in the Gemara. But in the case where it was tzoli and then slikeder, with its slikeder, the final bishul doesn't add anything because it's not changing the flavor, it's not adding to it. There's no benefit resulting from the second bishul. In this case, since there was no change, or addition, or detraction from the first tzli, it will be mutter, ba'achila, and it's going to be mekayim, the mitzvah say, from tzli yesh.